We're going to celebrate people because God celebrates people, and it's a big deal that you showed up tonight. I might just get straight into the preach. So how about we take a seat, give it up for our band as they take a seat as well. I'm really excited to preach this part tonight. And like I said, I want to welcome you here. If you're visiting or you've come just to see what's going on here, or if you're online, we'd love to welcome our online viewers as well. But I'm reading this interesting part of this text in the Bible, and it's kind of continuing on part 2 of Rest and Reset, which is a series we're in at the moment. And I wanted to read you this conversation of a guy named Moses that was having kind of like an altercation or an argument with God. I know, very naughty man, but we're going to get into that in a minute. And he's having this dialogue, and I was like, oh my gosh, there is so much in this we can learn as a church or learn what's happening here. And just for context, for those that don't know, Moses is the guy that God called and spoke to him through a burning bush. And you can find this in the Bible. And he called him to release people from Egypt and Pharaoh's leadership when they were all in slavery, they were all in bondage, they were all, held down, kind of like what we're talking about at the moment, rest and reset, finding God's freedom. And Moses is called to set these people free. And he has this moment where he's like, okay, God, I just want to have a conversation with you first. I know that you're calling me. I know that you want to use me. I know that you're interested in doing this. And it says in Exodus 33, it opens up with a complaint from Moses against God. And Moses' objection is, hey, God, if you have commissioned me to set these people free from slavery, how can I guarantee that you're going to be walking with me? Like, if I'm going to live this life and live this calling and do what I'm called to do, how can I guarantee you're with me? So let's start there. Who's excited for me to preach this tonight? I'm really believing my prayer this week was anyone that could listen to the preach tonight or be here, that they would have real and honest rest. In a society where we're in now and it's crazy and there's lots going on, we're overstimulated, and we talk about all this the last couple of weeks. I really had a prayer that people tonight, even myself, would stop for a moment, relate to this story, and go home today replenished, refreshed, restored, and we go home going, we can rest in a good and gracious God. But let me just read you this verse, and then I'm going to get into what I want to talk about tonight. So in Exodus 33:12, it says here, Moses said to the Lord, you have been telling me, lead these people, but you have not told me who you will send with me. So Moses is just straight up going, hey, I'm living life here. I want to do something for you, God. I'm trying to figure out what you're trying to get me to do, lead these people. But I'm asking you, God, who will lead me? I mean, I was reading this week, and I'm like, it's like kind of like us sometimes, like we're trying to figure out life. We're trying to figure out the burdens of life. We're trying to figure out the exhaustion of life. And we're like, God, who's going to help me do this? What church, what person, what? God, explain to me how I'm going to get through this thing called life. And so Moses is pleading with God. He's saying, God, you've asked me to do this. You're telling me you're going to get me to do this. What are you doing? And then it says in the next line here, Moses then says, you have said multiple times, you have called me by name and you have found favor with me. In verse 13 it says here, if you are pleased with me, this is Moses speaking to God, teach me your ways so I may know how to continue to find favor on my life. And remember, this is Moses, right, talking to God. He's like, remember, God, these are your people and this is your nation. And I love this part here because God just comes in real quick and he responds kind of out of context if you read it out of context. But this is what God says back to Moses. It says the Lord replied and he said this, my presence will go with you and I will give you rest. I find this interesting because Moses is here, and I don't know if anyone's felt like this, but they relate to this in 2023. And we're exhausted, and we're worn down, and we're overwhelmed, and we're overstimulated, and there's so much going on, and we're kind of like maybe of us asking God, what's going on? Maybe some of us don't even know God. We don't even know that there's an answer found in him, and we're confused, and we don't know what to do. And I love how God responds not with Moses, you need to do A, B, and C to find rest. He says, rest is when you find me. And my first point tonight is overwhelmed. sometimes life is just overwhelming. If I can get honest with you tonight, and we're a family here, and those online, you're all part of it. If we're honest with ourselves sometimes, we're honest about our careers, we're honest about our families, we're honest about our marriages, we're honest about anything, a lot of times we can feel overwhelmed. Just completely, and don't say, hang on, Sam, you're the positive preacher that's meant to be like, no, let's be real for a second. Sometimes in my own life, I wake up and I don't know why, I am overwhelmed. I am under the pump. I'm like, what is going on, God? This is a lot for me to take in. And sometimes we can have this dialogue, and I just wanted to speak to someone tonight. Sometimes just the very essence of existing is challenging to you. Like just turning up tonight was exhausting enough to get out of the car to be in church. Some of you tomorrow have to go to work and you just go, man, I don't even want to get out of bed. Some of us, and might relate to someone tonight, this is how I felt. Some of us are struggling sometimes just to survive. Let alone have purpose, let alone see what God's going to do with us, just survive. Just to pay the bills. And in this overwhelmingness, we become so overwhelmed that we become frustrated, we become burdened, we might come with questions like, come on, God, what's going on here? And Moses was feeling this. But I want to just point a key thing to how God responds to Moses, because I think this is very important for us tonight. Moses goes with his problems, and that's okay. He approaches God, and that's okay. You're allowed to take your problems to God. You're allowed to approach him. You're allowed to voice how you are. He's a father, you're a son, you're a daughter. You're allowed to talk to your dad. But listen to the response. The Lord ignores everything Moses is saying about who will go with him. He ignores the fact this is all happening, and he basically says this. He's like, hey, I get it. I empathize with you. I know that life's a lot right now. But God's response in just one small line of saying, get in my presence and I'll give you rest, is interpreted to me like this. God's saying to you, and I'm preaching to somebody tonight, you need to hear this to your heart. God's saying, you don't have to work it out. He's saying, you shouldn't leave me out. Not, now, I just talked about being overwhelmed. We've come to God where maybe you don't even know who God is. We don't even figure this out. And God's response to Moses wasn't, hey, you need to work this out. God's response was, hey, don't leave me out. My presence, not my plan, my presence, my existence will give you rest. Not your plan, not your who I'm sending with you, how you're going to work this out. My presence alone is the very thing that will give you rest. And I don't know if you've been a Christian for 5 minutes or you've been here for 5 years or 50 years. You need to know tonight, when you're overwhelmed, the first thing you need to go is not work it out, but don't leave him out. Because being overwhelmed, and I don't have all the answers, and I'm not here to say I know the story, because I know for a fact there's some people in this room tonight, and you are overwhelmed, and it is justified. It is, we believe you. We understand it. You have every right to be overwhelmed. What's going on in your life, what's happened, what's going on. This is not an encouragement to not be overwhelmed. This is an encouragement to say, don't leave God out. You might not even know God. You might even not know how this works. I'm going to read you this next part here. You might be tired tonight. Or even you might be lost. Or you might even be tired and you've tried everything. And God isn't part of your plan yet. It's kind of like Moses when he's like, I know that I'm not meant to just exist, God, and I know that I'm not just meant to be here. I mean, anyone have that feeling? They know there's more than what we're currently in. I know there's more, and I know my life equals to something, but the overwhelming and the stress is holding me back. And some of us, it's like, what is God's presence? Like, what does that feel like to see God? What does that feel like to know God? What does that feel like to be in God's presence? And sometimes I don't know how to answer this to people. Because later on in the Bible, God does this wonderful thing where he sends, which the Bible describes as his only son, Jesus Christ. This is before Jesus. This is Moses having a conversation with God. But then later on, God sends a guy named Jesus. And Jesus makes it very clear that through him, I'm going to read you this verse, through him you will find rest. But it doesn't explain how. Let me read it to you. Matthew 11:28, it says here, and this is Jesus speaking, "Come to me all that are weary, all that are burdened, and I will give you rest." Now I read this like, okay, can you make it more clear? Until I start to understand what God's trying to say here. I know that for a lot of us, and I'm just going to get real with you for a second, a lot of us have tried everything else. We might have tried pills. We might have tried alcohol. We might have tried social validation. We might have tried finding rest in all the wrong places, and we're like, we can't find this rest anywhere. And Jesus doesn't set up this, well, get your life right, find peace, do A, B, and C, and then I'll give you rest. Jesus says, all that are already burdened and all that are already restless and all that are, just come to me and give me a shot. And I wish this was clearer. Because some days in my own life when I'm overwhelmed, I'm like, what do I do? How do I navigate this? And Jesus said, you don't have to navigate this. You don't have to work it out. I'm just asking you not to leave me out. And so my only response to this tonight, if you're overwhelmed and you're wondering what God was doing with Moses and what Jesus came back for, I believe it doesn't start with the outside of your life. It starts with the inside of your life. And there's people right now that need to have just a quiet moment to say, God, I trust you. God, I might even not know you, but tonight can I feel your presence? My prayer this week was when I was preaching this, because I was like, I want to give the church some answers, and sometimes I can't. Sometimes things that have happened to us are so overwhelming. There isn't just a one-liner I can spit out and you go home and go, well, my life's changed. Sometimes the overwhelming of your situation is so much that even if I preach it really well, or I send the right people, like Moses said, who are you going to send with me? God's response is, don't worry about all that. Just focus about getting in my presence. And for some of you, that's easy. For some of you, it's hard. For some of you, you don't even know what it means to do. All I'm saying tonight is, before I go on to my next point, is stop for a moment, whether it's tonight or next week, and say, God, can I just feel your presence? And I don't know how to explain it, but then rest comes over you and peace comes over you, and it's not this 10-step process of God unwinding the overwhelmingness. It's just him giving you rest. He's a God of miracles, and he's a creator, and he created the very you. There's no 10-step guide defining rest. It's just saying, God, I trust that you'll give me rest. You might have tried every other, we talked about this, social media and alcohol and drugs and comparing ourselves, and there's all these other ways we try to find peace and rest. And God just says, find me. You know, the story continues because it's crazy, because here, after God says, hey, Moses, don't worry about working it out. Just don't leave me out. Find me. Then Moses says to him, well, all right, I understand that. And in verse 15, we find him, Moses says to God, he says, if your presence doesn't go with us, then don't even bother sending me. Like, I'm not even interested anymore in living the purpose of my life, or doing church, or following God, or leading these people free, or raising my family. You name all these things we're going through, going to work. He's like, if your presence ain't in the picture, then I ain't in the picture. And he starts to unravel this. And he says, I don't want to do it because I'm pretty much over it. And in verse 16, then Moses says, how will anyone know that you are pleased with me and your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish us from the other people on the face of the earth? And the Lord replies to Moses, I will do the very thing you have asked, because I am pleased with you and I know you by name. You know, this shocked me over this party because I believe this, and our church believes this, that every single person, regardless of their story, regardless of their outcome, regardless of their overwhelmingness, regardless of how they were brought up, how they live, how they've been chosen or not, we believe everyone can be used for the glory of God, and God can use anyone's story in this room to change the world. We believe that. Now, you might not believe that because you're like, I'm overwhelmed, I'm just trying to figure this out. But here at Heart House, we believe every single person from front to back online, God can use for such a purpose and such a thing as this right now. But when you're over it, it's like, cool story, Sam. I'm over it. Don't talk to me about purpose and plan. Don't talk to me about what's the difference between me and you if I'm just already over it. And Moses says to the Lord, unless you're involved, unless I'm refreshed, unless I'm rested, then I don't even want to be part of this. I want you to think about this. This is a guy that's about to lead thousands and thousands of people out of slavery. And I ask myself tonight, how many of us might be over it, but we have the key to leading our family out of slavery, our neighbor out of slavery, our husband or wife out of slavery, our kids? How many of us have been overwhelmed or over it, and we're happy to say, God, I'm so over it. I don't want any part of it. I couldn't care less what's going to go on. And so my second point tonight is, be careful when you're over it. And this is why. Moses displays his frustration because he realizes that even if God is going to offer his presence, and once he does access it, then without it, there's no point even doing the very thing he was called to do. We're talking about a topic about resting in God and doing the impossible with our lives. Not by working harder, but by pursuing God and going after what he wants to do with us. And this is my second point tonight. If you don't monitor your condition, now I might be speaking to believers tonight, or maybe you're new to church. If you don't monitor your condition, your heart condition and your life's condition of being over it, you will lose your compassion. This is why being over it is not a really good thing. Because when we're over it, if we get over it, we lose our compassion. If we don't focus on our condition, we don't have a moment to go, maybe I have been a bit agitated lately. Maybe I am just over it and I'm giving up trying to change my family or the world or my husband or my wife or my kids. Maybe I'm just overwhelmed and over it that I just couldn't be bothered anymore. And when we don't monitor our condition, we lose our compassion. I see it all the time in church. I see it all the time in Christ followers. They follow God, but they've lost their compassion for the person next to them because they are just over it. And so I kind of thought about this week and thought about to God. I said to God, I'm like, God, what is the answer for us when we're over it? Because we know that we have to get in your presence for rest. But what happens when you're over it? And I'm glad you asked tonight because I've got a volunteer to come and demonstrate this. So, Mr. I. Anson. You know, we've been talking about rest and all the things that come around finding, you know, this whole rest and reset of our lives, and especially in a chaotic world like today. And God was speaking to me about this ideology of good friends and good people and good community, because the thing is, it doesn't happen over us just trying harder or us sitting at home and saying, well, God, I love you. And because, you know, people that I know love God a lot and they are really good with God, but they're just over it. Like they're still over people and they're over the church and they're over their neighbor and they're over sinners. And some people that might even not know God, they're just over society. They're over how it all works. But good people do exist. And this is what I kind of imagine our lives, and when Lee finally figures this out, I kind of imagine most of us right now are like me right here now. Now you might relate to this and you're doing your thing. You've been in the sun for a while. You've been doing your job, you're raising your kids, or maybe you're trying to find that beautiful spouse, or you're not sure if you're ever going to find love, or you're looking for the right job, or you're not sure if you've made the right decisions with your income or your house purchase or whatever it is. There's a lot of things that overwhelm us and overdo it. But a good friend provides shade. And so, it's going to follow me. If I'm over here and I'm like, I'm over this. I'm over what? Yeah, he's getting it now. I find shade in the relationships that are around me. Like we might be over here, and you can stay there, Lee. And we might be doing a really good job for God and our marriage and all this, and we start to become a little bit over it. We start to become a little bit exhausted. The sun's getting a little bit too hot. Life's getting too much. And if we don't check our condition, we will lose our compassion. And so what I need to do is not flee from good community, not flee from God, not flee from the place, but I find someone that provides me shade. A friend that gives me rest. Someone that can give me hope. Someone that can say, you know what, it's okay to be in the sun sometimes, but it's okay to rest under an umbrella and take a minute to relax. Come on. A lot of us want to do this. I'll be right. I don't need that. I'm a burnt professional. I'll just burn out in a blaze of glory. And the byproduct of that is we become over it. We become over what God's called us to do. We get over God using our lives. We get over thinking we can make a difference. Some of us, we get over it. We don't even know God exists. And we start to get bitter and burnt because we've been in the sun. But maybe you don't have a friend. That's fine, because I don't have friends either. But maybe this is a good community. Maybe this is when I don't want to hop in the shade. I still turn up to church and I say, you know what, God, I'm trusting that in this shade I will have rest and I'll be restored. And so when I'm about to go back out in the sun and do what you called me to do, I'm going to find rejuvenation and I'm going to feel better about this. And maybe some of you don't even have this, so then think of the umbrella as God's rest. I'm just going to pop it up and I'm going to sit here, because here's the thing. If we don't get in the shade, we're going to be very, very over it in the sun. And some of you're feeling this tonight. You're like, man, I'm feeling burnt out. I'm over it. And Moses was too. And I said to God, what's the answer? And God said, find a good place to rest. We've got to be careful too, because there's a flip to this side of the coin. And I'm preaching to myself tonight as well. Some of us go to the right place, and this is what happens. We're in the sun, and we go to the place where we need to go. And we stand next to that person, and they don't refresh us. They encourage us to stay sore and burnt. They don't help us get over it. They suck the life from us and they exhaust us. And I'm preaching to myself tonight. I'm every day now being wary of this. When someone steps into my shade, I don't shut the umbrella. That I'm a person that speaks life into that person, that I'm someone that refreshes that person. I want over it people to come into our church, and our church goes, we're here to refresh you, we're here to restore you, we're here that God could use you, not put it down and go, well, just be over it. Because the calling of God on your life is so much greater than your friend validating your hurts. And I'm saying this with passion tonight because I believe it in my own life. The calling of God on this entire room and on online is far more greater than your feelings and your validation and you wanting to be with someone that's okay with putting the umbrella down when you're around. I don't know about you, but I'm believing tonight there's some people in this room that will become umbrella friends to those people around them, and they will bring refreshment, and they will bring encouragement, and they'll say to the people next to them, I know you're over it, I know you're sore, I know you're hurt, but I'm here to raise the umbrella and give you shade for a moment. You can be human around me. Yes. Some of you are looking for that friend. Start with the church. This is the first time I've probably declared it, and I'm going to say it publicly. At Heart House, we want to be umbrellas. We understand you've been in the sun and we understand that you're over it, but I believe shade and rest is so much more important than just going, go out there, tiger, and save the world. You better get over it. No, you can rest in our place. And then we can also, I'll take that. We can also be I want you to be aware of this. I'm preaching to the church tonight. Maybe those that don't believe, you can switch off for a moment. But I'm believing for anyone that comes in exhausted, we pull up the umbrella really quick. And so you can rest here. That's fine. You can rejuvenate here. That's fine. You don't have to have it all together here. That's fine. Because the will of God on your life is so much greater than you just being burnt out, bitter, and not around. This is more important. Rest in it. Rest in His presence and rest in our presence. It's all good. Think about it. Moses was called to set the whole nation free. And he says to God, because I'm over it, I almost don't care if we kind of stay here. I don't want to be that church. And I'm empathizing with some people tonight. I know you're over it, and I know there's a lot, and it's overwhelming. This is why we're preaching this. Rest. Don't work harder. Work smarter. Allow God to put shade over your life tonight. And rest in it. Thank you, Lee. Did a good job. It didn't rain, so we're all good. So, the first part of that is you can rest or find someone that you can rest in. But the second part of that, and I'm preaching to myself, I'm making that very clear, that when people come to me, I want to provide rest to them. I want to provide hope to them. I almost want to be known as the Christian man. I'm just using being my therapist for a second, so just bear with me. That people said when I approached Sam, that Christian guy or that pastor, that he gave me rest and he gave me shade. And if I believe that for my life, I'm believing that in this room tonight, there's some people right now, you're called to raise umbrellas in the communities around you. You might be in the sun too long and you might be burnt and bitter and you've got stuff going on, and that's okay because God will work with anything and anyone. He's done it with me. But you're going to switch it up tonight and you're going to leave and you go, I'm going to be more cautious and more ready to raise the umbrella when someone comes to me about something. Because something started to happen when God spoke to Moses and he goes to, I know you're overwhelmed. And I know you're over it. Very similar to these days that we live in right now. But he doesn't leave it at that. He leaves it with this. He says, I know you're overwhelmed and I know you're over it, but I also believe you can overcome it. You know, the church world was not meant to be known, or maybe if you're discovering what God's all about, we weren't meant to be known as exhausted and bitter and hurt. We were actually called to be free and full of life. And regardless of what happens in our life, regardless of what happened, I'm not saying the stories don't matter, but regardless of that, because we found rest in His presence and we found rest in our community, then we could then overcome what was holding us down. You know, the main thing about Moses was trying to figure out here wasn't, he knew he was called and he knew that God had asked him to do something and he knew that God was going to use him. That wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was trusting that he would have the ability to find rest in God and that God could rejuvenate him to the point where he could change the world or change this whole nation's lives. And a lot of us know that we're called, and a lot of us know that, and maybe let's just back the truck up. Maybe you don't even know who God is and you don't even know you're called. That's step one for you. But basically what I'm saying is anything you do in your life or anything that's happened, God calls you to overcome it. It's a very important thing. I'll tell you why. God's into three very beautiful things. Because if He's going to give you rest, then He's also going to give you a reset. And this is what God's really good at. God will rescue you. Now, if anyone can celebrate with me tonight, they know they were rescued by God. Their lives were a mess. Their marriage was a mess. Their kids were, whatever the mess was. And God rescues you. You find hope in Him. You find fulfillment in Him. You find joy in Him. And we go around saying, man, I found God. And people are like, man, this guy's got a new, what's going on? You know God. He rescues us. You know the story. Maybe for those that don't know and you don't know God, He wants to rescue you. And then the second thing he does, and I'm being biblical with this, so I don't want you to think this is just my opinion on this. This is for believers and maybe non-believers that are trying to figure this out. He will rescue you, and then he will rejuvenate you. He doesn't leave you there. Now, some of you are like, well, I have a really tragic story. Yes, God's in the business of rejuvenating that story. You might feel like it's impossible. I'm telling you now, in my own life, it's very possible. God can rescue you, and then he will rejuvenate you. And so what makes you an overcomer? Because the last thing God will do after he rescues you and then he rejuvenates you, and some of us will know where we are. We know that we've just been rescued, or some of us are flat out trying to get rejuvenated. But to overcome things, God will do one last part of your life, and that is to recruit you. You're like, what? A mess like me? Yeah. Your mess, your story, your pain, your what you think could not be used for good. He will rescue you. He will rejuvenate you. And here comes the reset of the message. Then he will recruit you. And so Moses says in this last part here, Moses said, well, all right, God, show me your glory. Show me what you're going to do. I trust you now. I'm in your presence. I'm finding rest. Show me what you're going to do. I'm ready to do this. Show me, God. And this is what the Lord responds to him in verse 19. He says, the Lord says here, he says, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and you will proclaim my name. The Lord says, in my presence, I will have mercy for who I have mercy for, and I will have compassion for who I have compassion for. And so he doesn't just leave you in the restless state, but he takes you and recruits you and says, no. After you're restored and after you found rest, I'm going to use you and your story for something beautiful. You know what? This is an important part of the story, because a lot of us, we're flat out trying to stop and find rest. That's one issue we've got to figure out. But the second one is that we stay in the rest zone for too long. And that's when we start to feel useless. We get over restlessness, and then we start to feel useless. And I'm saying God's calling you out of that now into recruitment. Because the moral of the story is that even though we step in and out of the shade, and even though we are overwhelmed, and even though things go wrong, God's goodness always goes before us if we let him go before us. Because your life has an experience. Your life has had struggles, and your life has been through a lot. But when you are refreshed by him and he brings you rest, come on, I'm preaching to somebody tonight. There is some overcomers in this place tonight. And I don't know if anyone wants to put their hands together and believe in me that someone here tonight was doubting that God could ever use them, but we're standing with you saying, you are an overcomer. You can beat this. You can do this. You can change the world around you. You might think that you're not worthy. You don't feel like you can't be used. But in this place tonight, I believe there's some overcomers in this place tonight that will overcome what came to rob, kill, and destroy them. And I'm saying this with almost some cheeky arrogance, because I believe it in my soul that someone here tonight, you're an overcomer and you're going to overcome it. God don't want you to stay there. He'll give you rest. He'll restore you, but he'll also recruit you. And I'm believing tonight there's some overcomers in this place. As the band comes, basically how the whole story went, and this is actually mid-story that what I read about Moses is when he's on the mountain, he's trying to figure out. He's like, God, I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to lead these people, and they're bananas. They made they ditched God and made like a false God, and they were worshipping like gold, and it was just all a big mess. So I can imagine that we have a messy life right now. This guy was in some mess, and those people were in some mess. It was a mess. But somewhere in between the mess, God made it an overcoming moment. And I can imagine how exhausting it was to fulfill God's story on their life. I can imagine that it was overwhelming. I can imagine that even trying to, live is exhausting. I can imagine that even trying to have all your relatives or your kids try to know God and hope they go to heaven is exhausting. I'm not saying life isn't exhausting. I get this. But God's here to help you overcome it. And so God gets involved, and the story basically ends with them repenting and moving forward, and they actually end up getting set free and following along and going where they needed to be. And I believe that for this room tonight, you might just need to, I'll leave you with this. You might have started the journey and it became overwhelming. You might have had a lot going on in your life, whether you're a Christian or not, and you're over it. We get it. Sometimes I'm just like, is the world even worth saving? But the last part of the chapter is God will help you overcome it. And through you overcoming your story and overcoming your pain and overcoming your journey, you will set people free. Your story of exhaustion will be a healing story for those that are exhausted. Your story that might thought that it can't be used for good, God will use it for His goodness, and wherever you go, His presence will go, and wherever you stand, He will be, because God is willing to go where you go. You just have to ask Him. God, where I go, will you go? And He goes, absolutely. And not only that, I'll give you some rest. Come on, stand with me tonight. I'm going to pray and then we're going to sing a song, but I want to believe that what was said tonight, that God was speaking to people internally. And this is for myself as well. We're trying to talk about rest in this chaotic world and these stories, and I want to just pray before we sing, just maybe for online too, and everyone in this room, if you want to close your eyes with me and forget what's going on around you tonight. We just simply say, God, tonight, those that are restless, those that have trouble sleeping, those that are not sure about tomorrow, those that are not sure about their future, that God, in this next moment, you give them some peace and some rest for their soul, God. That you start to rejuvenate people in this room, that you start to allow people to overcome what's holding them back, God. We believe this in this place tonight. That people will be set free from the bondages and the chains and the slavery they're in. And you will come in, God, and you will refresh their minds, you will refresh their souls, and you will set them free, because we are a church that believes in real, honest rest. For not just our bodies, but our minds and our souls. And I pray right now for those that have had restless nights, they have the best rest tonight. I pray for those in the room tonight that have been struggling with their tomorrow, that they have confidence that you will go before them in your goodness, God. And I also pray for those that didn't even know you would do this or could do this, that you reassure them in this place tonight or online, that you love them and that you want to help them overcome what they're battling, because you're a good gracious